Obviously, if Alok were here in person, I would thank him profusely for those very encouraging words. But sadly, he is not. But what we do have with us is his PPS, the Katherine Fletcher MP. So, Katherine, please pass on our grateful thanks to Alok when you next see him. Katherine is the Member of Parliament for South Ribble. And is a member of the Science and Technology Committee, and is going to take some questions from us. So, Katherine, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Welcome. The first question I have is really, how do we need to get to net zero? We all understand that. But we need to also benefit nature and people as we do that. How can we promote joined-up thinking in government?
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you to the Royal Society of Biology for hosting this event. I was in sort of had some private correspondence with Professor Sapolsky, Robert Sapolsky, you know, from Stanford, who opened his latest letter with "Congratulations on being a recovering biologist," which I thought was quite good. So I do have a science background and enjoy a good nerd. Getting to net zero is absolutely going to have to be part of everybody's lives. So if I maybe open the curtain slightly on the machinery of government to give you some idea of how we're starting to go about it, it's basically about pulling in lots of different government departments to start to talk in two different ways. One, how are we going to galvanise as the UK government being given this honour by the UN of the COP presidency or the designate COP presidency, and how are we going to galvanise to the negotiations, as my boss Alok has just talked about. But then how are we going to deliver on the world leading commitments that we've made? So there's a thing called the Climate Action Strategy Committee, or CAS, which is chaired by the Prime Minister, which pulls together all of the cabinet level departments to set a strategy for our climate action. And then there are implementation teams where we're talking to all of the departments and areas where policy has enormous levers that makes a big difference. So as Stephen, as you mentioned, the DEFRA is part of that in terms of what's going through with the Environment Bill that's going through Parliament at the moment, and the nature protections and peat. You know, it's something that's very interesting to a northerner like me. How do we protect those peat sinks up in the hills in the Pennines and make sure that they are acting as the carbon stores that nature defined them as? Or transport, with the move to electric vehicles, or you know, Bay's colleagues with net zero technology and innovations. And those conversations are all going on where we've set world leading targets and we're working the plan up to them. And we're looking to publish a net zero strategy in advance of COP, which will join all the bits of government up and set some targets that frankly only the learned ladies and gentlemen that are listening are going to help us achieve, because at the moment we don't have the answers. We know what we need to do, but the answers will come from the science and technology and engineering communities.
Brilliant. Thank you. Now, I've got a number of questions submitted live from Sarah Davidson. The first, I'm going to pick one of those, and it's a quite interesting one, which is around our relationship with the EU now that we have left the EU. Are there any elements of the EU Green Deal that the UK government is considering specific legislation for?
Well, I won't go over my pay grade. I'm hugely honoured to be a very minor cog in the wheel of this, so I won't necessarily rewrite government policy in a Zoom chat. But the EU's Green Deal is talking exactly what we're talking about. You know, very successful chats in the G7, but it's a clean and circular economy. It's restoring biodiversity, and it's engaging kind of technical investment and innovation to decarbonise transport, energy and building. You know, those are aims that we share and we're leading in. I know that there's a really significant and strong dialogue going on between the EU and CPD, the COP President Designate Sharma, in terms of the negotiations. But you'll forgive me if, and we're working together to go and challenge the world to be ambitious, but you'll forgive me if I perhaps don't talk about forthcoming legislation.
Okay, that's fair enough. I appreciate that. You don't want to make yourself a hostage to fortune. The next question is from Kylan Sharma, from Johnson Matthey. What is the government roadmap to support startups and innovation in sustainability and sustainable technology in the UK and attract the inward investment we need to support that?
Yeah, before I got this crazy job title of MP at the end of my name, I was running my own small business in the north of England, and the idea that we can take something from kind of embryonic to startup business to growth and scale. You hear us talk about the green jobs, that's the very basis of it. What we've got is we've got a dedicated business champion. So that's Andrew Griffith, is our net zero champion within the Bays department. Former businessman himself. We can be found often over a glass of something liquid having a bit of a chat about how we bring more of that business and science into politics. He's a similar vintage to me, joining the House in 2019. And he's doing two things. He's talking about the race to zero with the larger firms and encouraging firms to sign up to Race to Zero with credible plans to be net zero by 2050. But he's also launched a small business net zero campaign, and hopefully maybe that can get shared amongst the delegates, where it's got tips and tricks for people to, of any variety of business, engage and publicize their net zero journey, making just little different choices that turn the dial on achieving our commitments. And then in terms of innovation and creating new businesses that are going to solve those answers, there's two or three things. You'll have heard the government talk repeatedly about ARIA and the investment in science and technology, the improved links with the universities, catapult startup hubs. And what I would say is, if there's anyone in this community that feels that there is an idea and there are levers that government need to pull to allow that to happen, I have no control over it, but I'd love to hear from you, because what you shouldn't doubt is the amount of talking that's going on about it, the amount of thinking that's going on about it, and the amount of passion there is for British-based and in international collaborations, small businesses with great ideas that help us save the planet and create jobs. Sold. My door is open to anyone, and I will help as much as I can.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. Yes, I mean, I think everyone, businesses large and small, all want to do the right thing, but unless they have the information, then it's really difficult to know what the right choices are. So thank you for that. The next question comes from Louise Topping, Dr. Louise Topping, apologies, British Society of Immunology. For the past 15 months of the pandemic, the general public have been exposed to highly complex science and overall have understood it well and have a good grasp on, sorry, things are moving around, a good grasp on many, where are we? A good grasp on many immunological theories. How can we use this experience of the pandemic to communicate and highlight the science of climate change and the urgency of the situation?
There's probably two things I'd say to that. One, I think actually the urgency of the situation, I think a real step change has occurred in the last 2 to 3 years. I think lots more people really do grasp the urgency of the situation, and you have to pay tribute to wonderful communicators like David Attenborough for really starting to run that home. And I think we've looked to see trusted experts stood next to PowerPoint, and the British have found a love for that. And I think it's about how building on the trust that's been engaged. So Sir Patrick Vallance, whilst at the moment he's talking about the science of a global pandemic, he is the Chief Scientific Officer. He's our Chief Scientific Advisor within the COP unit and is a trusted and engaged figure. So I think the opportunity to build on a groundswell of interest, a public that's got slightly used to graphs, and trusted personalities that are experts and leading in their field to carry on the communication. I look forward to seeing quite a bit more of that, and fingers crossed we will in the run up to the COP conference in November. Absolutely.
This is a fabulous opportunity to build wider science capital amongst our population, to tap into that enthusiasm for knowledge. And of course, if we can shift the axis towards climate change, that would be great. I think we've probably got time for one more question before we have to wrap up and move on to the next session. And I suppose we've all got to play a part in this. in tackling climate change. How have you personally, or how should people approach that? And what have you done personally to change the way you go about your daily life that is helping to address this huge challenge?
It's a good question. I've changed my car. I couldn't afford an electric car just with the range that I needed, because we cover some distances. So I've taken the interim step and got a very, very tiny 900cc petrol. I've also insulated and gone round personally with all those squeezy cans, looking, with the expanding foam. And it's the idea that it's not just the cost that I'm looking at in terms of the financial zeros on the bill at the end of the month, but the idea that there is a broader responsibility to use energy in a clever way. And even just doing that, it's made a really big difference to the number of units that I'm using. I'm also starting to think about my choices in terms of how I communicate with others, what expectations I set, how do I take longer journeys? Do I do that by the convenience of car, or do that by public transport? But there's a really important message here. We are not going to, if people feel imposed and done onto, that we're going to struggle to take the public with us. I think it's beholden on all of us to offer people a menu of items. If you want to be a really big frequent flyer, okay, but here is what you do to mitigate that, to make sure that you personally are net zero. So I want to have the broadest range of different choices available to people, to allow them to play their part without having to follow a rule book, because if we take people with us, we'll achieve it much, much more quickly, in my view. I don't know whether others would agree.
I think as politicians, we know that we have to take people with us in all our decisions. That isn't always possible. But if we can get the majority to come along with us, then that is a huge step forward. Katherine, thank you so much for answering our questions.